Hello, my name is Malini Kamalambal. I'm a platform architect here at Humanitec. In this video, we will look at how we can use the Humanitec Platform Orchestrator to give developers self-service access to cloud resources. Now, self-service access to cloud resources is something very interesting because one of the biggest advantages of using cloud is how easily you can get access to the resources that you might need. A database, a queue, a cache, all of this is just one click away, right? But the challenges that come along with this is now your developers no longer need to know about their application code. They also need to know the details behind how to provision the various infrastructure resources and how to do it in a way that is secure and meets your organization's standards. This is where the Humanitec Platform Orchestrator comes in and what we'll be seeing in the demo today. Before we get into the demo, I want to take a brief look at how the Platform Orchestrator works. Now, the way the Platform Orchestrator works is it starts with your developers giving a abstract specification about the workload. And that can include details like what the workload is, what image it's using, what ports to expose, and what dependencies the application has. Maybe your application has a dependency on a SQL database, a DNS entry, or maybe a Redis cache. Those are the details that would go into this abstract specification and nothing more. And once this request reaches the platform orchestrator in a specific context, let's say in this context of staging, the platform orchestrator will now look through the rules that has been defined for it by the platform engineers. And these rules are what we call resource definitions. The resource definitions would include details like what's the type of the resource in question. Maybe it is a S3 bucket, a Redis cache, a MySQL database, and then how to provision this resource, whether to use an already existing resource or maybe to provision a brand new resource using infrastructure as code like Terraform. And then the final thing is when should this definition be invoked? Which teams get to use this resource definition, or maybe which environments get this specific resource definition. And what the platform orchestrator has gone through the resource definitions available and narrowed down to the specific one that is needed to provision the resources in this specific context, it will go ahead and create these resources. And while doing so, it will also generate the configuration files needed for the application as well as the infrastructure deployment. And then the platform orchestrator can either do the deployment by itself or pass it over to a third-party system like a CD tool that you're using. Now that we have an understanding of how the orchestrator works, let's go ahead to the demo. For the demo, I'm going to first wear a developer hat. And I have a very simple application here, a JavaScript application. It's a Hello World application. Nothing complex here. The only thing of interest here is the dependencies it has. It has a dependency on a Postgres database. And you can likely guess where this is going. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an abstract specification in terms of my application. And that is where the score YAML comes in. In this code file, I have a specification of what my workload is, what ports I need to expose, and then down below in the resources section, I mention what dependencies my application has. And in this case, I need a Postgres database to store the data. I need a DNS entry so folks don't have to remember my IP. And then I need a S3 bucket to store the files. These are the three resources that I need. Now, the next step for me is to give it over to someone who will do the work for me. And that someone is our platform orchestrator. So note that my job here as a developer is just writing the application code and then writing this abstract specification in terms of what my workload is and what dependencies it has. I did not write any Kubernetes manifest or Helm charts or infrastructure as code, but this is pretty much it. Now that takes us to the next step in the process, the platform orchestrator. So I'm going to switch over to the platform orchestrator UI. And here I already have a couple of applications and I'm going to create a new application to deploy my Hello World. Created a new application. And now what I can do is use my score file and start a new deployment here. For that, I have a simple one-liner. And all it does is invokes the score Humanitec CLI to do a deployment to the demo app that targets the development environment. So this is what I'm going to run next. All right. Now, when I started this deployment, I can see that it's already running here in the demo app development environment deployment. And the platform orchestrator already read through the request and found that it has to create a new workload, the Hello World application. And it has a dependency on some cloud resources, the S3 bucket, the Postgres database, and the DNS entry. Now the platform orchestrator will go through the matching step where we'll look through the resource definitions in the context of development. And now it is in the process of creating these resources. Now we'll give it a moment for it to complete. Now I can see that the deployment is complete, my containers are running healthy. And down below, if I look at the resource dependencies, I can see that now a new S3 bucket has been created for this deployment using a definition I already have. So this is the bucket, and if I log into my AWS console, I would see that this has been created for me. And if I look at my DNS entry here, I have a demo app DNS that was created. Now, if I access the DNS entry, I can see that this demo application is already up and running. Now, let me go back to my deployment. So I, as a developer, was able to get an environment up from scratch with a simple score file. Now, the next step is, this is day 0, right? Like, let's say I'm continuing my application development and I want to make some changes. And that also becomes very easy with the Humanitec Platform Orchestrator. Whether it's making a code change that changes the image of your container, or adding or removing any resource dependencies, it's all treated pretty much the same by the Platform Orchestrator. So the next step I'm going to do is I will probably remove the dependency on the S3 bucket. And now I want to get this, now that I have removed this S3 bucket dependency, I can go ahead and do another deployment, just like what I did earlier. I'm going to run my deploy script again and see that the deployment failed. So I'm going to click this deployment. It says it cannot find a resource type asset.default. So how do I go about troubleshooting here? Now the Platform Orchestrator has a feature that lets you compare between deployments. So I have a previous successful deploy and a deployment that failed. So my first step would be to compare between the two to figure out what changed. So I'm going to do a diff of the deploys. And I see that this, I'm removing a dependency on the S3 bucket. Now this is something I expected, but then I also have some changes where this is something probably I don't quite understand what went wrong. But I know that something changed in the score file, and that's what's causing this error. So let me go back to the score file. And looking through, I see that I have a reference for a resource asset bucket. So I'm referring to something in the resources section that's named asset, which is not available, and hence the error. So what I would do is I'll go ahead and comment it out and do another deployment to fix that error. All right, so let me see, go back to my application, and we can see that now a new deployment is running, and it has a dependency on a Postgres and a DNS, and it no longer has the S3 bucket reference that we had earlier. We'll give it a minute to run. You can see that it is keeping the previous version of the container up while it's spinning up the second, so there's no downtime for your application. And after the second version is up, it's going to spin down the other one. Okay, so now let's say we are in a scenario where we made the changes to the application, but maybe for some reason I need to roll back to a previous version. And that also becomes very easy. So with the Humanitec Platform Orchestrator, we keep the entire list of your past deployment. So at any point, you can roll back to a previous successful version if that's what you choose to. I have this redeploy option here. that I can use to trigger the deployment of a previous version. And any of these things that you see that I do via clicking around the UI, it can also be done via API, CLI, and we also have Terraform providers to create your resource definitions. So far we have seen how developers can get easy access to the cloud resources using the score manifest, the score specification, and the platform orchestrator. What we have given is developers a transparent abstractions into the cloud infrastructure. How much of the infrastructure plumbing they want to know or need to know is something that the developers get to control. The platform engineers can provide standard ways of creating a cloud resource, and from a developer perspective, they can easily consume these resources as and when needed, depending on their application requirements. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you very much for your time.